As a 28-year-old doctoral student in Seattle, I, Sarah Miller, stood on the cold university stage while the dean handed me my PhD in public health, but my eyes were fixed on the empty seat in the front row where my mother should have been. The silence of that empty chair screamed louder than the applause of the crowd. I clutched my diploma, my fingers trembling against the leather cover, as a notification chimed in my pocket. I pulled out my phone to find a group chat video of my mother, Margaret, laughing loudly in her backyard, holding a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other. My younger brother, Toby, was dancing around a smoking grill, wearing my velvet graduation cap as a joke. "Forget the boring speeches, Sarah," my mother shouted into the camera over the sizzle of cheap grease. "The BBQ is hot, the neighbors are here, and Toby just sold his first 50 plates of ribs. Now that is a real achievement. The documents have come into force, but not the ones she expected." I stood there, a doctor of public health, watching my brother wipe barbecue sauce on the gown I had worked 6 years to earn. My mother didn't just skip my graduation. She used my hard-earned moment to fund the grand opening of Toby's illegal, unlicensed backyard kitchen. "I can't believe you're not here, Mom," I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking as I stood alone in a sea of celebrating families. A second later, a text popped up from her. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah. Your little school party doesn't pay the bills. Toby's restaurant is the family's future now. By the way, we ran out of napkins, so I used those thick fancy papers from your desk. Hope they weren't important." My heart went numb as I realized she was talking about my original research certifications. That was the moment the daughter they knew died. I didn't head to the after-party. I walked straight to my car, drove to the downtown office, and signed my official employment contract with the state health department. If my mother wanted to prioritize Toby's kitchen over my life, I would make sure Toby's kitchen met the exact standards I had spent a decade studying. The power shift was silent, but it was absolute. They wanted a business. I wanted the law. 2 years passed in a blur of cold, calculated silence. I changed my last name to my father's maiden name and moved to the city's elite enforcement division. I became the lead inspector for the high-risk food sector. Every day, I studied the reports of a certain Toby's smokehouse that was expanding rapidly, fueled by my mother's retirement savings and a total disregard for safety codes. I sat in my office at the Department of Health, staring at a file filled with complaints of food poisoning and illegal waste disposal linked to my brother's address. My boss walked in and dropped a gold badge on my desk. "Miller, your lead on the district blitz tomorrow. We start with the unlicensed big players." I gripped the badge, the metal cool against my palm. My mother had always said my degrees were just paper. Tomorrow, I was going to show her exactly what that paper could do. The first stop on my list was the backyard where my dreams had been burned for a plate of ribs. The morning sun over Seattle was hidden behind a thick, gray mist, but my vision had never been clearer as I adjusted the navy blue tactical vest with the words Health Department etched in bold, white letters across my chest. I stood in the parking lot of a local precinct, watching 3 black SUVs pull in behind my lead vehicle. 5 officers and 4 junior inspectors waited for my command. I looked at the clipboard in my hand, specifically at the address written at the top. It was the house I grew up in, now transformed into a chaotic, grease-stained commercial operation known as Toby's Smokehouse. We arrived at 8:45 in the morning. Even from the street, the smell of burning hickory and old fat hung heavy in the air, a scent that used to mean home but now meant evidence. I led the team up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel where my mother had parked her car to avoid my graduation 2 years ago. The backyard was a maze of industrial smokers, makeshift wooden tables, and piles of unwashed plastic containers stacked near an open sewer drain. "Can I help you folks?" a voice shouted from the back porch. Toby stepped out, wiping his greasy hands on a stained apron. He looked older, tired, but his eyes still held that same spark of entitlement. He didn't recognize me at first. I was wearing a cap, dark sunglasses, and a mask, and I had lost 20 pounds of stress since the day I left. "We're not open for another 2 hours. If you're looking for the breakfast brisket, you're early." I didn't say a word. I simply held up my gold badge and a signed warrant. "Sarah Miller, Lead Inspector. We are here to conduct an unannounced full-scale health and safety audit of this establishment." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of a screen door slamming. My mother, Margaret, walked out, clutching a clipboard of her own. What is this noise? Toby, tell them we have a private catering license. She stopped when she saw the police officers moving toward the smokers. Then her eyes landed on me. She squinted, her face turning a shade of pale that I had never seen before. Sarah? Is that you? What is this ridiculous costume? Stop playing around and tell these men to leave. We're having a huge delivery from the meat wholesaler in 10 minutes. Access denied. I stepped past her, my clipboard ready. This is not a social visit, Margaret. This is a state-mandated inspection following 12 documented reports of salmonella poisoning linked to this location. Officers, please secure the refrigeration units and the waste disposal area. How dare you? My mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the neighboring houses. I am your mother. I raised you. Is this how you thank me? By bringing the police to my doorstep because you're still jealous of your brother's success. You're just a bitter girl who spent too much time in books and not enough time learning how to be part of this family. Toby stepped forward, trying to block my path to the main kitchen. Look, sis, or whatever you call yourself now. We're family. Just tell them everything is fine and we'll give you a cut of the weekend profits. Don't be a traitor over some stupid government rules. I stopped and looked him dead in the eye. I remembered the way he wore my graduation cap while mocking my life's work. The recording has been saved, I said calmly, pointing to the body camera on my vest. You just attempted to bribe a state official during an active investigation. That is a felony, Toby. Move aside, or the officers will assist you. The look of pure, unadulterated rage on my mother's face was my first taste of true justice. She wasn't proud of her daughter, the doctor, but she was certainly terrified of Sarah, the inspector. As my team began uncovering crates of meat stored at room temperature and flies buzzing over open sauce vats, I realized the escalation had only just begun. My family had built their empire on filth, and I was the only one qualified to tear it down. The heavy metal doors of the walk-in freezer groaned as my junior inspector, James, pried them open with a crowbar. A sickening, sweet smell of decay wafted out, cutting through the morning mist. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to reveal hundreds of unmarked plastic bags piled on the floor. There were no labels, no dates, and certainly no USDA inspection stamps. My mother, Margaret, stood at the entrance, her hands trembling as she tried to block the police from seeing the back corner of the unit. This doesn't belong to you anymore, I said, pointing my flashlight at a stack of industrial-sized crates hidden under a dirty tarp. I pulled the cover back to reveal meat that had turned a pale, sickly gray. Margaret, where did this come from? These aren't commercial invoices. These are scraps from a local pet food processing plant. You've been serving animal-grade byproduct to paying customers for 2 years. The silence in the yard was deafening. My mother's face went from pale to a deep, bruised purple. She didn't deny it. Instead, she turned her fury on me, her voice dropping to a hiss that only I could hear. We did what we had to do to survive, Sarah. Your father left us with nothing. Toby needed a win. So what if the meat is a little old? People love the sauce. They don't know the difference. You're destroying a local business over a few technicalities. Technicals? I countered, my voice echoing off the stainless steel walls. 12 people were hospitalized last month. A 5-year-old girl is still in the ICU with kidney failure because of your sauce. This isn't survival, Margaret. This is a crime scene. Outside, the situation turned violent. Toby tried to grab the clipboard from James, shouting that we were trespassing on private property. He didn't see the officer stepping up behind him until the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. You can't do this, Toby screamed, his face pressed against the hood of a black SUV. Mom, tell them. Tell them Sarah is just doing this because she's a jealous loser. My mother didn't look at him. She was staring at me, her eyes filled with a cold, calculating hatred. I should have thrown those fancy papers of yours in the fire the day you were born, she spat. You were always the parasite, Sarah. Sucking up my money for school while your brother stayed here to build something real. You're not a daughter. You're a traitor. The decision has already been made. I didn't flinch. I reached into my vest and pulled out the bright red closed by order of the health department stickers. I walked to the front gate of the property, the same gate I used to run through after school, and slapped the first seal across the entrance. This facility is officially condemned. I announced to the gathering crowd of neighbors and confused customers. All assets are frozen pending a criminal investigation into large-scale food fraud and public endangerment. As the tow trucks arrived to haul away the contaminated smokers, I saw a folder sitting on the grease-stained counter. It was my mother's retirement account statement. The balance was zero. Toby hadn't just used the barbecue to build a future. He had drained every cent she owned to pay off the black market meat suppliers. My mother was now broke, her business was a crime scene, and her only hope for a future was headed to the back of a police cruiser. The escalation was complete. The house was no longer a home, it was a cage. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hallway flickered as I sat on a hard plastic chair, my tactical vest now resting on my lap. The adrenaline of the raid had faded, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. 3 hours had passed since the red seal was slapped onto the gate. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket with messages from aunts, cousins, and old family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were calling me a monster for putting my own mother on the street. "Sarah, please." My mother's voice was stripped of its usual venom, replaced by a fragile, trembling tone that I knew was a weapon. She was sitting in the interview room across from me, her lawyer a cheap, fast-talking man Toby had met at a bar standing behind her. The police said Toby is facing 5 to 10 years for the bribery and the food fraud. You know he's not built for prison. He's just a boy with big dreams who made some mistakes. I looked at her through the glass, my expression unreadable. He's 25, Margaret. And those mistakes almost killed a 5-year-old girl. This isn't about Toby's dreams. It's about the law. The lawyer leaned forward, his voice oily. "Dr. Miller, let's be reasonable. If you sign a statement saying there was a procedural error during the inspection, we can get the criminal charges dropped to a civil fine. Your mother will sell the house to pay the victims. The family stays intact. If you don't, she loses everything. Is your pride really worth your mother being homeless? The decision has already been made." I didn't even look at the lawyer. I kept my eyes on my mother, watching the way she clutched a damp tissue. "When you used my original research papers to wipe grease off a table, did you think about the family being intact? When you missed the biggest day of my life to barbecue for the neighbors, was I part of the family then? That's what this is about?" Margaret snapped, the mask of the grieving mother slipping for a second. "A graduation? You're destroying our lives over a party? I worked 2 jobs to put food in your mouth while you sat in air-conditioned libraries. I gave you life, Sarah. You owe me your silence." "I owe the public the truth," I said, standing up. "I saw the bank records, Margaret. I know Toby drained your accounts, and I know you signed the checks for the black market meat. You weren't a victim of his mistakes. You were his partner. Access denied." I turned my back on her pleas as she began to wail, a loud, performative sound designed to draw the attention of the officers in the hall. As I walked toward the exit, my Aunt Martha blocked my path, her face twisted in disgust. "You think that fancy degree makes you better than us, Sarah? You're just a cold-hearted snake. Blood is thicker than water, but clearly, your blood is made of ice." I didn't stop. I walked out into the pouring Seattle rain, the cold water soaking through my shirt. My family was launching a social media campaign against me, painting me as the jealous doctor who framed her hardworking brother. The public was starting to take sides, and the pressure was mounting for the Department of Health to drop the case. But they didn't know one thing. I had saved the physical receipts from the pet food plant. The evidence was locked in a vault, and I was the only one with the key. The notification pings on my phone felt like physical stabs as the viral video titled "Heartless Doctor Destroys Mother's Dream" reached 100,000 views. My Aunt Martha had filmed a tearful interview in front of the shuttered barbecue stand, claiming I had planted the contaminated meat to settle a childhood grudge. The public comments were a storm of vitriol, calling for my resignation and even my arrest. I sat in my darkened apartment, the blue light of my laptop reflecting off the gold badge that now felt like a target on my back. "The decision has already been made," I whispered to the empty room, but this time it wasn't about the inspection. It was about the exposure. I opened a secure cloud folder and began uploading the files that would end the debate forever. I didn't just have the receipts from the pet food plant. I had the laboratory DNA results comparing the meat found in Toby's freezer to the bacterial strains found in the hospitalized children. The matches were perfect. I hit the send button on an email addressed to the 3 largest news networks in Seattle. The subject line was simple: the real cost of Toby's smokehouse. Along with the lab results, I attached the scan check signed by my mother, Margaret, made out to a shell company used by the black market suppliers. My mother hadn't just been a bystander. She had been the accountant of the operation. An hour later, my doorbell rang. I checked the camera to see my cousin Leo standing there. He was the only one who had sent me a supportive text since the raid. I opened the door, hoping for a shred of family loyalty. "Sarah, you have to stop," he said, his voice frantic as he stepped inside. "The family is meeting at the house. They're planning to file a civil suit against the city, claiming you harassed them. They want you to give them the original lab samples so they can do their own independent test." I looked at Leo, a small part of me wanting to believe he was there to warn me. "They don't want a test, Leo. They want to destroy the evidence. Why are you really here?" Leo looked down at his shoes, and that was when I saw the red recording light on his jacket pocket. He was wired. My own cousin had been sent by my mother to bait me into admitting I had a personal vendetta. "I just want us to be a family again, Sarah," he said, his voice suddenly sounding rehearsed and loud. "Just tell me you did this because you were mad about the graduation, and we can make it all go away." "Access denied," I said, my voice as cold as the meat in Toby's freezer. I reached out and snatched the hidden camera from his pocket before he could react. "Go back and tell Margaret that the news will be at her door in 20 minutes. Tell her that if she wants to talk about family, she can do it from a witness stand." I pushed him out and locked the door. The betrayal was complete, but the shield of my professionalism was now a sword of justice. By morning, the narrative of the jealous doctor would be replaced by the reality of a public health predator. I wasn't just Sarah the daughter anymore. I was the whistleblower they couldn't silence. The morning news cycle hit the city like a tidal wave, and by noon, the video of my Aunt Martha crying on the porch had been replaced by a high-definition image of the pet food receipts and the laboratory DNA matches. The public outrage shifted instantly. The people who had been calling me a monster were now demanding that Toby's smokehouse be burned to the ground. I watched from the safety of the Department of Health headquarters as reporters swarmed my mother's driveway, their cameras capturing the exact moment the police returned to serve a fresh batch of felony warrants. "The decision has already been made," my director said, placing a hand on my shoulder as we watched the live feed. "The district attorney is taking over. You are officially off the case for your own safety, Sarah. Go home. Lock your doors." But I couldn't go home. I had a feeling that the desperation of a cornered predator was far from over. I drove to the satellite office where I had kept my personal research files, the ones my mother thought she had destroyed when she used my papers as napkins. I had kept a secondary backup of the original soil and water samples from their backyard. Evidence that would prove the illegal waste disposal had been happening for years, not just months. I arrived at the quiet office park at 7 in the evening. The security guard at the front desk was away on his rounds. As I stepped into the hallway leading to my lab, I saw that the door was slightly ajar. A familiar, cheap floral perfume hung in the air, mixed with the smell of heavy-duty bleach. "Looking for these, Sarah?" My mother, Margaret, was standing over my desk, a gallon of industrial bleach in one hand and my leather-bound research journal in the other. She looked haggard, her hair matted and her eyes bloodshot. She had used her old emergency key card from when I used to bring her here for lunch. "Access denied, Margaret," I said, my voice steady despite the hammer of my heart against my ribs. "Put the journal down. You're committing a felony in a government building. This isn't a backyard barbecue anymore. There are cameras everywhere." "I don't care about cameras," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You destroyed Toby. He's crying in a cell because of your science. If I burn this, if I wash away your little samples, they won't have a case. They'll think you made it all up because you're a bitter, lonely woman." She began pouring the bleach over my desk, the caustic liquid soaking into my papers. I didn't rush her. I didn't even try to stop her. I simply pulled out my phone and held it up. "The recording has been saved, Mom. I wasn't just recording you. I was live streaming this to the precinct. You didn't just destroy evidence. You just confessed to knowing exactly what was in those files while on camera." My mother froze, the heavy scent of bleach filling the small room. She looked at the phone, then at the ruined papers, and finally at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a mother. I saw a stranger who had traded her daughter's soul for a pile of rotten meat. You really hate us that much? She whispered. I don't hate you, I replied, as the sound of distant sirens began to wail closer. I just don't belong to you anymore. You made sure of that when you chose a grill over my life. The police burst through the door 30 seconds later. As they led my mother away in handcuffs, she didn't scream or fight. She just stared at me with a look of pure, frozen emptiness. The house was gone. The business was gone. And now, the last bridge between us was nothing but ash and bleach. The fluorescent hum of the courthouse basement felt like a funeral dirge as I stood behind the two-way mirror, watching my brother Toby talk to the district attorney. He was no longer the arrogant king of the backyard grill. He was a terrified boy in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen. Across from him sat his public defender, whispering words of survival that I knew would cut my mother to the bone. The decision has already been made, Toby, the prosecutor said, leaning forward. We have the DNA, we have the bleach incident on camera, and we have the financial records. Your mother signed every check, but we know she was the one in charge of the money. If you testify that she forced you to use the spoiled meat, if you tell us she was the mastermind behind the pet food scheme, we can talk about a plea deal, 5 years instead of 20. I watched my brother's face. There was no hesitation. There was no blood is thicker than water. He didn't even ask about our mother's health or how she was holding up in the women's detention center. He simply grabbed the pen and began to write. It was all her, Toby sobbed, the sound muffled by the glass. She said Sarah's school was too expensive and we needed the money. She found the suppliers. I just did the cooking. I'm the victim here. Access denied. I felt a surge of cold irony as I listened to him repeat the very words my mother had used to defend him. She had burned her life to protect him, and now he was using the ashes to climb out of his cell. I walked out of the observation room and into the hallway, where I found my mother, Margaret, being led toward her own hearing. She was in handcuffs, her face aged a decade in a single week. She saw me and stopped, the guards allowing a brief moment of silence. Sarah, she rasped, her voice dry. Talk to your brother. Tell him not to say anything. We have to stick together. The family is all we have left. Tell him I'll take the blame for the money if he just stays quiet about the rest. He's already talking, Margaret. I said, my voice flat and devoid of the pain I expected to feel. I just watched him sign a statement naming you as the sole architect of the entire operation. He's trading your life for 15 years of his freedom. My mother's knees buckled. If the guards hadn't been holding her arms, she would have collapsed onto the marble floor. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The child she had skipped my graduation for, the boy she had used my research to protect, had just sold her out without a second thought. He wouldn't, she whispered, a single tear cutting a path through the grime on her cheek. He's my son. And I was your daughter, I replied. But that didn't stop you from turning my life into a joke for his sake. Now you're learning the price of the loyalty you built on lies. The documents have come into force. As the guards pulled her away, her cries echoed through the rotunda, but I didn't turn back. The family future she had bragged about was now a series of depositions and betrayal. I walked out of the courthouse and saw a group of protesters holding signs with the names of the children who had gotten sick. One of the mothers recognized me and nodded, not as a daughter, but as the woman who had brought the truth to light. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Sarah the Shadow. I was Dr. Miller, and the weight of my degrees finally felt like wings instead of lead. The gavel fell with a final, echoing thud in the sterile auction room, signaling the end of an era. The family home, the yard where the smoke of Toby's grill had once promised a fortune built on poison, was officially sold. Because the property had been used in the commission of a felony and my mother had defaulted on every loan, the state had seized everything. I sat in the back row, my face hidden behind dark glasses, watching as a property developer bought the lot for $300,000. The documents have come into force. I walked to the front of the room after the crowd dispersed, meeting with the court-appointed receiver. Because I had been the one to provide the whistleblower evidence and had a legal claim to the small portion of the land left to me by my late father, the court had granted me a percentage of the sale proceeds. It was $60,000, not a fortune, but enough to change lives. What do you want to do with the check, Dr. Miller? The receiver asked, sliding the paper across the desk. I don't want a cent of it, I said, my voice firm. I want it transferred directly to the Pediatric Kidney Foundation. It's for the victims of the salmonella outbreak. Specifically for the 5-year-old girl who is still fighting for her life in the hospital. Tell them it's a donation from a doctor who believes in safety over profit. I drove to the house one last time before the bulldozers arrived. The red tape was still flapping in the wind, a faded reminder of the day I chose my badge over my blood. As I stood on the porch, my Aunt Martha pulled up in her rusted sedan. She looked smaller now, the fire of her social media campaign extinguished by the reality of the criminal convictions. You happy now, Sarah? She spat, though her voice lacked its former sting. Your mother is starting her 10-year sentence on Monday. Toby is going away for 5. You've turned your own family into a headline. You're living in a fancy apartment while we're losing the only roof we ever had. The decision has already been made, Martha, I replied, not even turning to look at her. You all lost this roof the moment you chose to stay silent about the gray meat in that freezer. You didn't care about the family when I was crying alone on a graduation stage. You only cared when the money stopped flowing. Access denied. I stepped off the porch for the last time. Martha began to scream about how ungrateful I was, but her words felt like static noise. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old, grease-stained graduation tassel that I had found in the dirt of the backyard earlier. It was the only thing I was taking with me. As I drove away, I saw the demolition crew moving in. They weren't just tearing down a house. They were erasing the rot that had defined my life for 28 years. My mother had once told me that my degrees wouldn't pay the bills. She was wrong. My degree didn't just pay the bills. It bought justice for 12 families and gave me a life where I never have to smell that hickory smoke again. The heavy steel door of the Washington State Women's Correctional Center buzzed open, a sound that felt like the final click of a lock on my past. I sat behind a scratched plexiglass partition, waiting for the woman who had once been the center of my world. When Margaret finally walked out, she was unrecognizable. The vibrant, loud woman who once ruled a backyard empire was gone, replaced by a gray, stooped figure in a drab denim jumpsuit. Her hair had thinned, and the arrogance in her eyes had been replaced by a bitter, simmering resentment. The documents have come into force, and they had carved a permanent line between our lives. She picked up the phone, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed it to her ear. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. I heard you sold the house to a developer, she rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves on gravel. You sold the place where your father built his life. You're a heartless girl, Sarah. Toby is in a medium security block 300 miles away, and he cries every time I call him. He's losing his hair. He's scared. And you're out there living your perfect life while your family rots. The decision has already been made, Margaret, I said, my voice calm and low. Toby isn't crying because he misses the family. He's crying because he realized that his charm doesn't work on prison guards. And the house? The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a factory for poison. I didn't sell it to hurt you. I sold it to heal the people you broke. You always were too smart for your own good, she spat, a flicker of the old venom returning to her gaze. You think you've won because you have a fancy title and a clean vest. But you're alone. No one in this family will ever speak your name again. You're a ghost, Sarah. Access denied. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No sadness. Not even the sting of her rejection. I'm not a ghost, Margaret. For the first time in 29 years, I'm actually real. I don't need a family that demands I be small so they can feel big. I don't need a mother who values a plate of ribs more than her daughter's future. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, laminated photo. It was a picture of the 5-year-old girl who had been in the ICU. She was standing in a park, smiling, holding a balloon. She's home now, I said, pressing the photo against the glass. Her medical bills were paid by the sale of your house. That is the only legacy you have left. Not Toby's restaurant. Not your pride. Just the fact that your downfall saved a child's life. Margaret looked at the photo, then looked at me, and I saw her lip quiver. For a second, I thought she might say she was sorry. But then she slammed the phone down and signaled for the guard to take her back. She chose her bitterness over her redemption, just as she had always chosen Toby over me. As I walked out of the prison gates and into the bright, clear air of a Washington spring, I took a deep breath. My phone buzzed. It was an invitation from the University of Washington to be the keynote speaker at the next graduation ceremony for the School of Public Health. They wanted me to talk about the importance of ethics and courage. I smiled, realizing that the empty chair from my own graduation was finally filled not by a mother but by the thousands of people I had protected. My past was a closed file, and the future was wide open. The auditorium was a sea of black robes and mortarboards, the air buzzing with the electric energy of hundreds of young professionals ready to change the world. I stood backstage at the University of Washington, adjusting the silk hood of my own academic regalia. This time, the velvet was heavy with the weight of experience, not just expectation. As I looked out from behind the heavy velvet curtain, I didn't search for a mother who would never come or a brother who had traded my love for a shortcut. Instead, I looked at the front row. Sitting there were 12 families. Among them was a little girl named Maya, who waved at me with a hand that no longer carried an IV line. Beside them sat my colleagues from the Department of Health, the men and women who had stood by me when my own blood had called me a traitor. The documents have come into force, but the only ones that mattered today were the certificates of health and safety I had signed over the last 12 months. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Sarah Miller, the dean announced, his voice booming through the speakers. I walked toward the podium, the applause of thousands washing over me like a cleansing rain. I didn't start with a joke or a quote from a textbook. I looked directly into the eyes of the graduates and spoke from the scars on my heart. 5 years ago, I stood on a stage like this, and I felt like a failure because the people who raised me chose a backyard barbecue over my graduation. I began, my voice steady and resonant. I thought my degree was just a piece of paper that had cost me my family. The silence in the room was absolute. I leaned into the microphone, my eyes fixed on the empty seat in the very back that the university had symbolically left open for those who couldn't be there. But I was wrong. That piece of paper was my shield. It was my voice when I was being silenced. It was the power to protect a city from the people who thought they were above the law. Never let anyone tell you that your hard work is a waste of time. Your education is the only thing that no one can take away from you, not even the people who gave you life. Access denied. I wasn't just speaking to the students. I was finally slamming the door on the ghost of Margaret Miller. I told them about the importance of being a whistleblower, about the courage it takes to be the villain in your family's story so you can be the hero in a stranger's life. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. After the ceremony, I walked out onto the campus green. The sun was setting over the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. Maya ran up to me and handed me a small, handmade card. It was a drawing of a doctor wearing a cape. "Thank you for making the bad food go away," she whispered. I knelt down and hugged her, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't known in 29 years. My mother was in a cell, my brother was a number in a system, and the house I grew up in was a vacant lot waiting for a new foundation. But I was here. I was whole. I walked toward my car, leaving the tassel from my old graduation gown on a bench for the wind to take. I didn't need it anymore. I had finally graduated from the shadow of my past, and for the first time, the road ahead was perfectly clear,